What's up, everybody? I'm Jesse Showalter, and today I want to talk about how to quote a website project to a freelance client. So many people have written to me and asked me how I quote projects. Do I do it hourly or project-based? How do I present it? Is there any hidden fees? What do I do about all those things? Is there a method to my madness? And to that I say, just a tiny bit. Here's the big question. How much do you charge for a website? People might write you or email you or text you or social media you or whatever and ask you that question. Hey, how much do you charge for a website from me? How much are you gonna do that for? And that is where I use kind of a four-part equation that gets to my quote. My four-part equation to get me to the outcome of what I'm actually gonna quote a client goes something like this. Overhead plus workload plus experience plus pain equals your quote. I'm gonna unpack each one of those four things so you understand how to actually, build out your quote for your clients and your projects. Okay, number one in that equation was overhead. What is overhead? Well, if you worked at like a design agency, there would be rent to pay and desks to rent and chairs and all sorts of stuff that requires you to pay on an annual kind of basis. I still have overhead because if I'm gonna do freelance work, I'm gonna do it right here in this office. I have computer equipment that I need, I have screens, I have hard drives, I have rent that I have to pay. So even if you're working remote or freelance or whatever, you still have a base cost for you to run your business. So you gotta put that together. What does it cost for you to pay rent and pay for equipment and pay for all the things that you need? And you decide what goes into that base cost, but at the end of it, you should have an annual base cost or an overhead for you to operate and run your business. But you shouldn't stop there. Just covering your bare minimums is not enough. That's what it takes for you to stay in business, not necessarily for you to flourish or to represent the value that you bring. We're gonna talk about pricing structures in a second, but before we get there, I wanna talk about your experience because that's the second part. We have overhead and we have experience. You need to ask yourself how much experience you have in the project you're about to quote. Is it an educational website? Have you done a lot of those? Is it a nonprofit? Have you done a lot of those? Do you have examples of them in your portfolio? Are they good examples? I don't have a specific number that I can throw out for experience, but really this is a personal question. How much should this client or this project value the experience that you can bring to it? How much do you feel like you could or should fairly charge for that? That's a question that you have to ask yourself. Okay, the third part of this formula is workload. You can't do a 100-page enterprise e-commerce site for $1,000. That's just stupid. There's a certain amount of work that goes into a project. You also don't want to charge $50,000 for a one-page landing page that has nothing but a headline and contact form. That don't make no sense either. So you got to make sense out of the type of work somehow that you're doing. Okay, so all that being said, how do you find what it's worth? Well, you have to use some sort of pricing structure. There's a few really popular pricing structures out there, and I'm gonna mention those now. Number one, you have hourly. Number two, you have project-based, or number three, you have value-based. I'm gonna go through each one of them really quickly right now. Hourly is kind of obvious. You quote a certain amount of hours that you think it's gonna take you to complete a project, and then you charge an hourly rate, $70 an hour, $80 an hour, $200 an hour, whatever you think is fair per your experience and what you think is like right for you to get paid according to your overhead. So you're gonna come up with an hourly figure and you're gonna charge that. So I'm not a big fan of hourly if you're gonna do big projects. If somebody asks you to do a one-off thing, hey, I just need this done really quickly, you just charge them an hourly rate. That's what I use hourly for. Consultation, quick one-off projects. That's how I kind of do that. But when you start doing big projects and billing hourly, the client starts feeling the weight of each extra hour that you feel like you need to spend. Why do you need to do research? That's gonna take more hours. They start thinking in that mindset, and that's just not a good place to be. Also, if you do work really, really fast, you get paid less. That's also counterintuitive to what it should be if you have more experience and you're better at what you do. So hourly, nah, for big projects. You could move to project-based, which is kind of just like hourly on steroids. Project-based pricing is where you take your hourly rate and you look at the size of the project and you quote it really, really big. You don't give them your hourly rate, but you internally, not externally, but internally are saying, I think this is gonna take me 100 hours to do and I charge $100 an hour. So hey, the project's about $10,000. And they say, well, how does that all work out? And you say, That's the price of the project. I'm doing this size of work for you. My caliber and experience is gonna cost you $10,000. That's the project-based pricing. It's kind of just internal hourly, and you get to tweak it how you want. The last structure for pricing projects is called value-based pricing, and it's really about the value of me as a designer or a developer that you are getting. Value-based pricing is really intuitive. We've all actually experienced it. If you go out and you buy a purse or something from Walmart versus go to a Louis Vuitton store and buy a purse there, they both do the same thing, right? And it's not even necessary. And yes, the Louis Vuitton purse is probably better made and has certain qualities and materials, but materials and all that aside, there's a name brand that you're kind of locking into, and there's value that comes with carrying around that Louis Vuitton purse. It's more expensive. That brand is more expensive. So if people want to work with you and you say, well, I'm a personal brand, I bring this level of value and brand equity to any project that I work on, now you have to pay for that value as well. And so I kind of break it down like value-based pricing is really project-based pricing with value dumped on top. And so that's kind of the way I look at it. There's probably more complex ways to kind of break that down, but it's really, hey, you know, I'm gonna do this project in 100 hours and I charge $100 an hour, so that should be $10,000, but I have been doing projects for 10 years. I have this amount of, you know, experience and knowledge I'm gonna bring to the table. I bring consultation, I bring all these other things, and after you're done, you can say that you've had this work done by me and it'll be in my portfolio. So actually the price of the project is 15 or 20. As you start growing your hourly rate, which is your base value based on your overhead and your experience, and then your project-based pricing, your value continues to grow. And that's why some people can charge 25, 35, 55. All right, so far we've talked about 3 out of the 4 pieces of this equation. We've talked about overhead and experience and workload. We've touched on pricing structures and how you figure out how to quote that workload or figure out how much it should cost. And last thing we're gonna talk about is my favorite topic, and that's pain. People might be out there saying like, pain, like I don't understand, like what are you charging for pain? What kind of pain are you talking about? I'm talking about there are certain times in projects with certain clients that it's gonna be painful for you to do. Maybe it's a project you don't like doing. Maybe the client has shown that they're gonna be kind of a pain and need extra hand-holding or work. You should charge for that because in the end, that's gonna cost you more time, more communication, more frustration, doing things you don't want to do. Maybe you're trying to move away from development and do more design and somebody wants you to do development. You're allowed to put a pain cost on top of that. Hey, I don't want to do this, but if you really want me, I will for this amount. So there's a pain cost that I tack on top of things. With that being said, as you apply cost to painful projects, you also have the ability to reduce costs for fun and exciting projects. Maybe it's something you really believe in. Maybe it's something that your heart is excited about. Maybe it's somebody you love or admire and respect and want to work with. Then you can drop the price because they're not only not painful, but they are enjoyable. And so you can fluctuate costs like that. Okay, now that you've put your cost and your quote together, you've figured out what your overhead is to be a successful business and cover your bare minimums. You've added on your experience and your value to it. You figured out what the workload is, and you've also figured out if it's painful or enjoyable, and you've put all that together into a project-based quote. Hey, here's the quote, here's what it will cost. Now you just need to go present it. Well, that's it. That's how I quote projects. Thanks to you guys who stuck around and watched the whole video. I know it was a little bit longer, but I super appreciate you guys that watched everything from start to finish. Make sure you leave a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. I do lots of videos like this one, so stick around. And if you have questions, which I'm sure you do, leave them down in the comments. I will respond to every single one of them, I promise. I hope you guys are having an amazing week designing amazing things, making amazing things, and quoting your projects with confidence. I'll see you in the next one.